Good evening. My name is Peter Christian Eigner. I'm the director of the Gotham Center for New York City History, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to our conversation tonight. If you're not familiar with the Gotham Center, as usual, I invite you to learn more about us online at gothamcenter.org, where you can find well over 1,000 essays, book reviews, event recordings, podcasts, digital exhibits, walking tours, classes, and more on all things New York City history. So tonight, as part of our regular interview series, we'll be discussing this outstanding and very long-awaited book from the late Jeffrey Kroessler, Rural County Urban Borough, which I dare say is the greatest history of Queens that any scholar has yet produced and will remain so for some time. In the vast body of research on New York City history, there is precious little on the so-called outer boroughs. And as a child of Queens myself, I'm proud to second what Jeff argues in the introduction to this book, which is that were it not for the enormous shadow that Manhattan casts, we would all recognize far more how remarkable Queens is. It is not just the largest of the boroughs, but the fourth largest metropolis in the United States and the most ethnically, religiously, and linguistic diverse place on earth today. Queens functioned as the city's breadbasket and as Brooklyn's source of water for many years, then as a place of leisure for the working class, and eventually manufacturing and housing for them as well. And most recently has been transformed by the investment and labor of immigrants from around the world. It represents, as he says, the great arc of urban history in the United States. So I'm very pleased that we are featuring this work, and though I'm very sorry that we cannot have Jeff here himself, I'm delighted to welcome his wife, Laura Heim. Laura is an architect and teacher with over 35 years of experience in architecture and historic preservation. Before establishing her own firm, she worked for several in Manhattan. Her experience in educational and institutional design, including the renovation of Fifth Avenue's Presbyterian Church, the Ruth Schilling Hennessy Alumni Cottage at Rutgers University, Stafford Hall, the University of Vermont, and the library at the Stephen Wise Free Synagogue. She received her Master's of Architecture from Columbia University in 1984. She has taught at the University of Virginia, the University of Florida, Catholic University, SUNY Stony Brook, Pratt Institute, and the New York Institute of Technology. She is a member of the American Institute of Architects and of the Historic Districts Council, where she now serves on the board of directors, and she lives in Sunnyside Gardens, one of Queens's true treasures. I'm also honored that we could be joined tonight by Kristen Sylvian, Associate Professor at St. John's University and the Director of its Public History Program. Dr. Sylvian's research focuses on urban history and housing and urban planning policy. She's currently working on a study of industrialized housing during the 1960s and 70s, tentatively entitled Instant Housing, the Mutual Housing Experiment, New Deal Communities for the Urban Middle Class. Her research has appeared in Buildings and Landscapes, the Journal of Urban History, Planning Perspectives, and Environmental History. She previously directed the public history programs at Western Michigan University and the University of North Carolina at Wilmington. So I'm going to turn things over to Laura now. We're going to have a quick talk about the book for the next 20 minutes or so. And then we're going to have some conversation, and then we will take questions from you. As always, we disabled the chat function out of respect to our speakers, but you can send questions at any time in the next hour, and I strongly encourage you to do so. We will take those questions around 7:30 or so. So with that, please join me in welcoming our guests with the usual silent applause.
Hi, welcome. I'm pleased to be here to present Jeffrey Kroessler's life work, Rural County, Urban Borough, A History of Queens. My thanks to the Gotham Center for New York City History for sponsoring this event, and specifically to its director, Peter Christian Agner, for inviting me. I would also like to thank Professor Kristen Shelvian for participating in the conversation. I've been pleased this fall to see so much interest in the history of Queens, and I'm glad this is also virtual, so it will reach a wide audience. Jeff received his PhD at the CUNY Graduate School, so I am also sure he would be honored to have this talk held at the Gotham Center. Jeffrey Kroessler was the foremost expert on the history and preservation of his beloved borough of Queens. I will begin with a brief introduction to his work in advocacy. Jeffrey, who was my husband, unexpectedly passed in the winter of 2023. He was a champion of preservation in New York City. He was a historian, preservationist, brilliant author, librarian, and educator. With his training as an academic historian, he uniquely promoted the recognition of everyday spaces in neighborhoods, which were historic and worthy of note. He was a devoted educator. His career culminated with his position of professor and interim chief librarian at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, CUNY. He truly enjoyed guiding the students to resources and knowledge. As an author, he wrote numerous articles, papers, and editorials on the history and preservation. His significant publications include those shown here. You can clearly see an emphasis on urban history, New York City history, and of course, the history of Queens. His last book, published posthumously in June 10th, 2025, is the one we will discuss this evening. So the book is published. Where did it start? As early as 1987, Jeffrey was quoted in the New York Times championing the heritage of Queens. The historic heritage of Queens is denigrated because it doesn't have H.H. Richardson and Louis Sullivan. What it has are builders. This is a borough of homes and factories. There's nothing glamorous about that, but there's something historic and unique. This is Jeff being quoted by David Dunlap in 1987, Queens cultivates its heritage. At that time, he was working on his dissertation at the CUNY Graduate School, Building Queens, the Urbanization of New York's Largest Borough. He studied under Richard C. Wade, the soul of urban liberalism, and benefited greatly from the work of Vincent Seyfried, a historian of Long Island who wrote volumes on Queens, Long Island, and the Long Island Railroad. The core of the book owes much to his dissertation, but interestingly, one of the readers, Joshua Freeman, suggested it start earlier with the Dutch and English, and the second, Stephen Petros, encouraged him to bring it past the 1939 World's Fair to the present. Jeff readily embraced these ideas. Thus, to quote Andrew Dolkart, finally a comprehensive history of the physical and social evolution of the borough of Queens. Having grown up in Garden City, Long Island, and studied urban history in Manhattan, and having lived in Forest Hills, Astoria, and finally in historic Sunnyside Gardens, Jeffrey was uniquely positioned to create this history of place in between, Queens. My role was to shepherd the book through the publication process with the very enthusiastic Rutgers University Press. I learned so much about the steps involved in creating an academic book: preparation, first submission, second submission, production, final proof, and finally publication. The process of creating a book is similar in ways to creating a building, which I'm more familiar with as an architect. Create, submit, review, comments, and then again until you reach the final proof, where only corrections can be made if required, no content or structural changes. Dedicated and talented editors contributed, with special thanks to Peter McCoulis, executive editor at Rutgers University Press, for so adamantly encouraging publication. While the manuscript was complete, the images still had to be selected and placed within the text. As per Jeff's initial proposal for the book, image sources relied heavily on Queens sources. The extensive collections of the Queensborough Public Library, as well as the LaGuardia and Wagner Archive, provided many images. They are both incredible research sources for the history of Queens. Many other institutions contributed as well. So many individuals assisted in this process, from finding the original manuscript on the server, which was open as he was working on the book, to verifying sources, to chart data, to editing text and images. Numerous colleagues and professionals assisted. Jeff's colleagues were outstanding in answering any of the questions I had about the process. Librarians and archivists at numerous institutions lent their expertise. 2 photographs were generously contributed by David Dunlap and Joel Sternfeld. CUNY's Office for the Advancement of Research assisted with funds for the indexer. Jeff's colleagues at John Jay College were always supportive of his research and work. The history is made accessible and compelling by the clear structure of the book, as it is arranged in chapters which follow a basic chronological timeline. You can see the first major division: rural, urban. Within those sections, the major drivers of change within the period are highlighted and explained in depth. Throughout the text, this history is rooted in place. For many, Queens is where you go to the airport, or it's where All in the Family's Archie Bunker lived. But there's so much more to the story. Beginning with the Dutch, This book tracks the amazing development of Queens from a rural county to the current diverse and bustling urban borough. So let us get our bearings. I always like to start with a map of Queens as a geographic overview. You can see in green Flushing Meadow Corona Park in the center at the north end, and you can also see many other numerous parks and cemeteries throughout the borough. The Van Wyck Expressway creates the major north-south artery, basically connecting the airports LaGuardia to the north and JFK to the south of the borough. Queens is bounded by Long Island, Nassau County, to the east, and Manhattan and Brooklyn to the west. Grand Central Parkway, Northern Boulevard, Queens Boulevard, and of course 495, the Long Island Expressway, and the Belt Parkway slice east-west through the borough. Within that framework of transportation, you find that Queens is today made up of many distinct neighborhoods with their own character and ever-evolving history. These neighborhoods are a unique and charming feature of Queens. Many do not realize that Queens was originally Queens County and included Nassau County, which split off during the process of consolidation when Queens joined New York City. This 1859 map shows the original extent, and the chart shows the tremendous increase in population over a 100-year span, primarily in what would become Queens, with less growth in Nassau. In 1898, through an elaborately detailed political battle, consolidation was completed in Queens, becoming a borough, and Nassau County was returned to Long Island. These county years were very bucolic and rural. Farms dotted the landscape as Queens provided produce to Manhattan. From the 18th century to the 20th, a defining industry in Queens, particularly in Flushing, was the nursery business. Samuel Bound Parsons Jr. worked with the famous landscape architect Calvert Vaux and was responsible for much of the planting in Central Park, among others. Little by little in the early 1900s, commercial buildings began dotting the farmland. With the rapid growth, often the buildings were cookie cutter and repetitive. The building and the landscape became the fabric. But let's go back to the land. Long Island is defined by the Great Terminal Moraine, which is the southern limit of a glacier that covered North America in the last ice age. The ridge creates a boundary between Flushing on the north and Jamaica to the south. Southern Queens looked to Brooklyn for markets as a gateway to Manhattan, and Flushing sought direct communications to Manhattan by water. Thus, they initially developed very independently. One of the most unusual, now lost features was the Hempstead Plain, which you can see in the illustration below, a unique prairie, the only tall grass prairie east of the Appalachians. The English set up a racetrack there in the late 1600s, and it was later purchased by A.T. Stewart to create Garden City, Long Island. Queens has a deep history of religious tolerance dating back to the Dutch and English in the 1600s. The 1640 charter for the original Dutch colony decreed that only the Reformed Church could be practiced, but other religions were tolerated. When Peter Stuyvesant took over as Director General of New Netherland, he made it his mission to uphold the status of the Reformed Church and suppress all religious dissent. John Bound's house, shown here on the top right, exists today in Flushing as a marker of this time. He allowed the Quakers to use his home for meetings. He was banned from the country later to win his return. We presented the book this fall twice in Flushing and took a tour of the Bound house. I highly recommend it. This sense of religious tolerance exists today in Queens with the diversity of its inhabitants. The book details the history of various railroads traveling through Queens extensively, their locations, mergers, failures, and impact on subsequent development, with the Long Island Railroad finally becoming profitable and stable. The railroad was initially created to send produce to Manhattan and manure back to Queens for fertilizer. It then expanded to provide access to housing and entertainment. With transportation options expanding, there came new settlement patterns. The merchant elite set up mansions along the East River as summer homes accessed by ferries, which lasted for only a short period. The railroad led to expanding railroad suburban development, with large tracts of land now easily accessible, as you can see with Richmond Hill. In Victorian times, Queens became the home of noxious industries. As industrialists needed inexpensive land outside Manhattan, to expand their factories and wanted to take advantage of looser regulations. They created industrial villages. Here you can see the village of College Point in 1876 with the still standing Pappenhusen Institute in the center with its mansard roof. Conrad Pappenhusen made his fortune in the hard rubber industry and created a village for his workers. Below you see the Steinway Piano Factory. Founded by Henry Steinway, his son William moved production to Astoria in 1870s and also created a working community. These large tracts of open land were also ideal for horse racing, which had been continuous in Queens, first founded in the Hempstead Plain, established by the English in 1865. Other racetracks followed, but it was in the 1800s when the sport attracted large crowds. Also during Victorian times, Queens became a place to play and relax and escape the dense urban fabric of Manhattan. With trains now providing better access, people flocked to the south to the beaches. Wealthier families stayed in hotels like Arverne by the Sea, while middle-class families rented small wooden bungalows like these Rockaway bungalows. To the north, North Beach Park, now LaGuardia Airport, was created by Steinway to provide enjoyment for the workers. And in Middle Village, Queens, across from the Lutheran Cemetery, you could find Niederstein's, a German restaurant and hotel. We celebrated Jeff's father's 80th birthday at Niederstein's. It was sadly demolished in 2007. The Queensboro Bridge was a direct result of the consolidation of Queens into Greater New York City. It was completed in 1909. When it opened, it was the fourth longest bridge in the world. The new bridge dramatically impacted the increase in population of Queens. The bridge had been a topic since at least 1863, with Queens agitating repeatedly for this bridge. And now at last, they had a two-level double cantilever bridge directly connecting Manhattan to Queens. Any discussion of Queens would be remiss without mentioning the vast opportunity for housing experiments and types throughout the 20th century. Given the open land from the nurseries and farms, and the increased transportation access with the Queensboro Bridge, trains, and subways, the time was ripe. The borough was booming. First came experiments inspired by the Garden City movement in England, with Forest Hills Gardens, 1909, which aimed to provide a more attractive suburban housing model without an endless repetitive grid. Winding streets with integrated landscape designed by the Olmsted brothers created a picturesque residential setting. And the West Side Tennis Club, home to the US Open up until 1977, when it was moved to Flushing Meadow Corona Park, provided a place to enjoy recreation. And then in 1924, work began on Sunnyside Gardens, which can be seen here under construction in the vast empty land adjacent to the Long Island Railroad tracks and easily accessible by the subway to Manhattan. Today, if you fly into LaGuardia and look out your window, if you're on the right side, you can clearly identify it as this green oasis in the sea of the dense urban Queens fabric. I thought I would go a bit more detail into Sunnyside Gardens, as Jeff also wrote an extensive book on this planned community, on which I assisted by providing diagrams and illustrations created by my architectural office. It gave us a chance to collaborate a bit prior to my role on this book, where I selected all the images. I live in Sunnyside Gardens and conveniently walk to work, as my architecture studio is located a block away from the house. I've completed over 40 projects in my neighborhood, all those red dots, which demonstrates a high level of community trust. Jeff and I were partners in preservation as we worked to successfully have the neighborhood designated a New York City Historic District in 2006-07. As with Forest Hills, Sunnyside Gardens embodies the Garden City movement ideals that originated in England. Housing reformers' goals were to combat the social ills of crowded, unhealthy urban areas with a new model of garden suburb housing. Emphasis was on the open space, scale, and landscape. You can see here, starting with the old law tenements, laws were passed which reduced the building footprint and increased the basic light and air that was given a given right to all New York City residents. Sunnyside Gardens went a step further and dramatically increased the land to built form ratio. The core feature in Sunnyside Gardens is the courts. And here you can see a prototypical court layout. You can see it's clustered around it. There's a block, then there's 3 courts within that block that create a unique sense of community for the residents. And it's a mix of housing. The light gray is the 1 families, the middle gray is the 2 families, and the dark gray is the 3 families. So it also creates a social mix of renters and homeowners within the same community. The red squares and rectangles are the porches. A key feature and desire for the neighborhood was that you always are related to the garden. That was a very important aspect of it. And so the 1 families typically have a porch on the front where you can look out to the street and your little front garden. The 2 families have a porch in the back, which provides a porch for the ground floor apartment, and the 2nd floor apartment has a terrace that's above the porch. And then the 3 families also have the same situation where they have a porch for the ground floor and a terrace for the 2nd floor apartments. These alleyways slice through the blocks, and when you come to the next block, they're offset, so it's not a strict grid. It creates a more picturesque way to look through the neighborhood. I thought I'd show you a couple of projects that protecting and restoring the charming streetscapes and 100-year-old houses has been a focus of my office. I will illustrate 2 typical projects to give you an idea of how they can be preserved and modernized for contemporary use. The 1 family house, as you can see here, this is a 1920s photo. Of course, the fixtures are obsolete, and this doesn't really accommodate contemporary life. Although the picture rail I still have in my house. It's a very good feature. And a typical house it's 17.5 wide. It's very narrow. We have very small houses. The garden is given more of the prominence than the house itself. It has a dining room, kitchen, which traditionally, as most houses from this time period, are separated, and a living room in the front, and then 3 bedrooms on the 2nd floor. One of the bedrooms is basically a closet. It's used as a children's room or a studio. And so basically what happens is people want to have a more open kitchen dining area. So this is actually my next door neighbor. And their house had been renovated, but there was still a divide between it. So we opened it up and created a peninsula, a large living room in the front, and then 3 bedrooms still. We reconfigured the closets, and of course it's all new fixtures and finishes. So what's interesting about this is that while the outside is protected by the Landmarks Commission and it's very consistent, very simple, our houses are very similar on the exterior. On the inside, you can do whatever you want. And so it's very interesting as a person in the neighborhood to go into each other's houses because they're all so dramatically different. In this case, they have we did a very clean and modern approach. This is what it was before. You can see how much it improves it by opening it up and allowing the landscape also to be part of the dining room. One of my early projects is also featured in the New York Times. Another project that's very common is taking the 2 families and creating a 1 family. I've done 6 of these in the neighborhood. People feel the houses aren't large enough for a family, a growing family. I came from an apartment. I think my house is large, actually, but I know in contemporary standards, they're small. So in the typical 2 family has an apartment on the ground floor. There's a living dining, 2 bedrooms, kitchen, bath, and same on the 2nd floor. So what you do is you open up the living room to make 1 large living room on the ground floor. Again, a kitchen dining area that's open. So we sneak in a powder room, and then upstairs you can get a master bedroom with a master bath, a shared bath, and 2 bedrooms. This house has a flat roof. Some of them have a pitched roof, and if they have a steep pitched roof, you can get the master bedroom up in the attic. So you can see over time, these are the old fixtures. They're not the original, but they're old. Often the porches have been enclosed to make more rooms, which of course harms the aesthetic of the streetscape as well as the interior. And this is in the living room where this is where the stair on the other side of that wall goes up to the 2nd floor apartment. So you open that up, you come down into the living room. When you walk into this house, you can actually see all the way back to the garden. And the best part is the porch. The porch is this lovely place where you come out and can see the street. You can see your neighbors. It provides an airlock. It provides insulation. The windows are insulated. And I use it as I put my plants in there in the winter because it's lovely for them. All new finishes and fixtures and more contemporary, of course. And the most gratifying part for me is restoring the streetscape. So in 1940s, the city of New York took a photo of every property in New York City for tax reasons. And so if you find that tax photo, which is easy to find now, it's all online, and you use that, the Landmarks Commission, you can get a staff permit if you basically try to replicate it, which is what we did in this case. During the construction of this, it was the first major project in the neighborhood after we became a district, and the contractor put in an 8-foot tall plywood fence because he was putting all his garbage out here. He wanted everyone to see it. And everyone was wondering what was going on behind that fence. I mean, because we were nervous. People were nervous. We had just become a district. And when the fence came down, the owner was a rock star. People were taking photos. People were very excited. And since then, I've restored 17 front and rear porches in the neighborhood. It caught on, and I'm not the only one doing it. So it really helps create a sense of continuity in the community. Okay, so now let's go back to the historical timeline. The Great Depression, 1929 to 39, paused all these garden suburb experiments. In fact, many in Sunnyside lost their homes to mortgage foreclosure, but it gave way to the New Deal housing efforts. An example shown here, Boulevard Gardens in Woodside. FDR established the Public Works Emergency Housing Corporation with the Public Works Administration, PWA. The housing division of the PWA created loans for limited dividend corporations to invest in new housing construction. In the case of Boulevard Gardens, the housing division signed the loan for the work, and the work was completed in 2 years. Imagine if we could do that today. Public housing experiments continued, with NYCHA submitting plans to the PWA for Queensbridge houses, a successful large-scale public housing project designed to house the working poor located on the East River north of the Queensboro Bridge. The New Deal also created an expansive public works program, 1933 to 39, to combat the Depression. In New York City, Mayor LaGuardia, a friend of FDR, and the Parks Commissioner Robert Moses worked together to use the New Deal to the city's advantage. Moses played a central role in this time in transforming the Queens landscape. The New Deal made possible the Triborough Bridge and Reese State Park. Another set of projects focused on New York World's Fair, as Robert Moses could justify new roads and for access, as well as transform the area from a dump to a majestic park. The 1939 World's Fair focused on the future, the world of tomorrow. The futuristic exhibition buildings for GM and Ford, with the futuristic buildings of GM and Ford, but also pointed towards a charming suburban future that would be realized in the post-war decades. Post-war Queens also sprouted planned communities, more modern and durable, such as Glen Oaks Village. Built for veterans in 1947, it provided 2,900 two-story units. Also, Fresh Meadows and Parkway Village, home to the UN employees, including the diplomats. And later Rochdale Village, known primarily for its social values, as planned to be integrated and inexpensive as well. In 1963, it was the largest cooperative apartment complex in the world. The demographic of Queens began to change dramatically from 1950 to 2020. All in the Family, with Archie Bunker's home shown in the credits here, went on the air in 1971 and ran for 12 years. It recorded an ordinary working man negotiating this changing social landscape. The book acknowledges the changing demographics of the borough as it transitioned from 96% white to 23% white. A driving force was the change in immigration laws with the passage of the 1965 Hart-Celler Act, as well as proximity to the airports. The book is infused with the history of place, and of course with Jeffrey Kroessler as the author, the importance of preservation is addressed in the concluding chapter, with praise given to all those local authors who wrote with care about their neighborhoods, recording them for the future. He also mentions some structures that have been lost and some that have been saved. Here's the Tent of Tomorrow, which, while enduring years of neglect, is finally being stabilized. The dramatic demographic shift in Queens created a renewed vibrancy and sense of place. While the inhabitants changed, the pride in its neighborhood remained. While Queens is the most diverse place on the planet, let's hope in the coming years a unique sense of place can be maintained. So read the book and hop on the 7 train and discover Queens. Thank you.
Well, Laura, I'm so pleased to hear your presentation, and I thought it was just wonderful. And of course, as you know, I'm quite biased in favor of Queens. And as you and our listeners could probably tell by my accent, I'm not originally from Queens, but I've now lived in Queens for 14 years and have made Forest Hills my home for the entire time that I've lived in New York City. So I'm most fortunate. Laura, you and I first became acquainted as a result of the Vernacular Architecture Forum. And this is an organization that a number of the folks who are active with the Gotham Center may, in fact, be familiar with VAF. But that certainly is an organization that was important to Jeff. And I thought that we might start our discussion with a little bit more about the importance of a sense of place to Jeff. Being his education under Richard Wade emphasized, and of course, that was the earlier generation of urban historians than I worked with at Carnegie Mellon. But it certainly emphasized the landscape and the need to sort of get to know the city and look at the city. So if you would start off a little bit about, what, what drove kind of Jeff's interest in the place, and particularly Queens as a place?
Well, first, I want to say that Richard Wade was really a pioneer. He made urban history an important academic subject. I mean, that was what he did for history, frankly. And Jeff wanted to study that, and that is a large reason why he went to the CUNY Graduate Center, because he didn't want to do generic history. He was very interested in urban history, and you have to imagine that was an emerging topic at that time. So clearly, the interest was there right from the start. Right from the start. And I think the interest in place, when he was researching his dissertation, he became very involved with different local preservation groups. He helped save the Terracotta Building as one of his early fights. And I think he realized the importance of these buildings and neighborhoods to reflecting the history of the place. So I think his preservation, it morphed into more preservation. He took his history education and used it actively in the preservation community, which the preservation community loved, because he was like an encyclopedia. I mean, we didn't have the internet then, He was real. He could really recount all the facts, and he knew Queens backward and forward. And I think that contributed to his passion about place and protecting it. I think it's interrelated.
Well, I think it's wonderful because the breakdowns that the book offers really gives us some insight into, what kind of are what is the basis of Queens, looking at the natural landscape, the ecosystem. And we shared an interest in the waterfront and the marshes of Queens, which of course have dramatically disappeared. And I think that, is kind of woven through the work, the ecosystem, and then the architecture and how those things meet. And I think that also speaks to his approach to the research. And I wonder if you might talk a little bit about, the book is wonderfully offers a bibliography, the footnotes, obviously. But if you could give us a kind of little insight into, Jeff's research process is such an impressive list of institutions and organizations that are both here in town as well as outside. And is there any place that he came back from saying, oh, I found this treasure trove, or I was surprised by X or Y in the research process?
Okay, first I want to start with Jeff is from Long Island. I mean, Jeff grew up in Garden City. He was born in Brooklyn, but he grew up in Garden City. So I think between the being from Long Island and studying in Manhattan, and I think he knew Queens in terms of, you pick your research topic, you want to do urban history. It hadn't been done. I mean, no one was looking at Queens So I think he just said, "Oh, this is great. You know, it's in between the places I love." So I think that is also part of the reason Queens became, and no one was doing it. And you know, when you're doing research, that's key.
Oh, yes,
You want to
yeah.
find some niche that no one's going after yet. And you know, nobody did for years. Actually, it was a long time ago he started this process. Anyway, in terms of the research, of course, I wasn't with him when he was doing his dissertation, but I can speak to what I know from what I experienced at the later end. He used a lot of primary sources. He did a lot of digging. He used a lot of the LaGuardia archives. The Queen's Library has an amazing archive. The Astoria Historical Society has things. The Queen's Historical Society. There are a lot of smaller, not smaller, but a lot of, it's not just the New York Public Library. It's not just the New York Historical Society. To get the real, you know, depth of Queens, you have to come out and look. And Vincent Seyfried had done so much direct research, transcripting from newspaper articles. He's really key to all of the history that was accumulated about Long Island and Queens. And he advised Jeff on his dissertation. So he had a direct connection with Vincent in the process of doing this research. People have told some of his colleagues, history colleagues, have told me they can't believe Rutgers published the bibliography and footnotes because they're so extensive in terms of paper space.
Oh, they're extremely helpful. In fact, I was just kind of going over them again this afternoon and was really struck by, as you said, not only like the big and obvious places, the New York Public, the New York Historical Society, the New York Historic now, but also all of the, you know, churches, corporations, the bridge, the authorities that, you know, control the bridges, for example, and the tunnels. I mean, I think that that's really, it's this remarkable job that was done. And I want to now, if we could, kind of go on to a little bit about the title, because I was struck by the title from the outset. Now, you spoke a little bit about how Queens was a county and then in its rural days. So let's talk about Jeff's interest in, you know, the old Queens, when the Queens had the farms and Queens offered hunting to the upper classes from Manhattan.
Actually, Jeff is kind of a sports guy, so I think he's more into the horse racing.
I didn't know that about
No,
him.
he wasn't into horse racing, but in terms of the history, he was into.
Oh,
He
okay.
wrote a whole book about the sports in New York. He was very interested in the sports in New York, actually. In terms of the name of the title of the book, the title of his dissertation was "Building Queens: The Urbanization of New York's Largest Borough." And as I said, it didn't go back to the Dutch, and it didn't go to the present. And I don't think he was going to title it the same thing. We did not discuss the title. I mean, he did it, but I knew him pretty well. So I think what happened is then it was like it's not really just building a borough. It's this surprising dichotomy between rural and urban, and is a much more dramatic way to phrase it than to just say it got built. And because it extended farther, there's more of the rural component in the book than there was originally. So I think that I assume that's partially how it evolved, rural, urban. I think it's more dramatic personally myself.
Yes, well, and I think that it, you know, it applies on so many different levels also, because as you spoke of the housing landscape, and that's one reason why I was so interested in coming to Queens, is because it has this wonderful cross section of kind of starry-eyed housing developments. You know, as you pointed out, starting off with the Forest Hills Gardens, and you know, running up through early developments such as some embarrassed, I can't remember the name of the development right now that was built for the United Nations.
Parkway Village, yeah, Parkway Village.
Thank you, thank
Yeah.
you. That, you know, that as I said, in the you know, embracing of desegregation, you know, that it took place. Then we have Union, built with Leicester, and so it kind of goes on and on. Did Jeff have a special interest in that broad kind of housing landscape, and was it just kind of stemmed from his life in Queens, or would you say it was kind of bigger than that?
Well, I think in researching Queens, it's such a dominant part of the development of Queens. I mean, it is unbelievable the housing experiments that happened in
I
Queens.
know.
It's just another like because we're Queens, it's so unknown. It's striking to me how many, and they're unique. There were philanthropists were doing it. There were limited dividend
Yeah.
agreements that did it. There were, just people cared. People wanted to do the right thing with housing, and they got together and did it. I mean, architects worked with regional planners and created corporations for Sunnyside so that they could build their dream. I mean, it's an amazing thing. Now, granted, there was more land then, but I also think there was this sort of idealistic motivation that we can really change the way our city is through housing. And
Yeah,
all
and
these experiments show it. I don't see this level of experimentation now, but it was an experiment not just in how it looks or how it is planned, in the whole way it's structured and how it's funded and the whole, it was so unique. It could be its own history. So I
yeah,
think once he discovered all that, it's a key part of the book. It has to be.
yes,
It
yes.
has to be. And it happened so rapidly that all of that development happened so rapidly that you know I mean, in Sunnyside Gardens, I always think it's interesting because it happened over a 5-year period. So they built like some of the blocks, and then the next year they built the next. So those architects had a dream job. They built their blocks, and then they said, "Oh, let's make it a little wider. Let's add a different porch." And they honed it and they changed it each time. They did. It's not the same blocks as you keep going. I mean, that kind of experimentation. Who gets that opportunity? It's amazing.
I know it's wonderful, and that it continues, well up into the post-war period, with the huge Glen Oaks
Yes.
development, which is just right near St. John's University. And when I was looking for housing, that was one of the places that I looked at again and again because I was so admired the cooperative model, which of course is one of my particular areas of interest. So Queens is blessed with so many of those different things.
And you
Um,
can study it directly because you're here.
exactly. And I can try to interest my students in them as well. How about a little bit more about Jeffrey and yours? I mean, obviously, Sunnyside Gardens is perhaps your favorite place in Queens, but if you could give us a little sort of insight on what were the places that he loved or admired in Queens?
It's funny. I've been asked that question in other conversations, and I'd say first anything that needed preservation, anything that needed protection. He's like the underdog is going to get it, and that's what he gravitated towards. So I would say that first. I mean, it was always fun to discover new places. Uh, with him actually because he knew the area so well. We enjoyed going to old German restaurants because Jeff's family's German, so it was. I mean, they're kind of dying out now, but it was fun to do that. Um, I've told this story before. When I first met Jeff, it's like our second date. He's like, we're gonna go to Flushing Meadow, Corona Park. I'm like, I'm an Upper West Side girl. I'm like, I think I've been to Queens twice. So we go out to Flushing Meadow, and we're in this like totally abandoned field with it's all overgrown, and there's this like ruin sitting in front of us. And it was the Aquacade from the 1939 World's Fair, and the city had let it go into disrepair, and they tore it down the next year. But I mean, he gravitated towards. He fought very hard to try to save that, actually. But I really think that's what it wasn't like going, Flushing Meadow Park and walking around. It wasn't that. It was more what was needed, and that's where he would gravitate towards.
And that's like he's like sort of a scholar of Queens dedicated to preservation. So all of the landscape was kind of equal value, if you will. As you
Yeah,
said, he gravitated to the one that was in need.
he did like going to the beach.
Oh.
The beach is he's a lifeguard. He was a lifeguard when he was in college. So he in Long Island. So the beach, I would say the beach is definitely something that he gravitated
Yes, and
towards.
and that's what got me interested and in turn getting my students involved with the Jamaica Bay National Wildlife Refuge.
Hmm.
Is we're working with the Park Service and their efforts to document the marshes in the area, and particularly with Superstorm Sandy, after Sandy, because some people may realize that there was extensive damage there, including the saltwater inundating one of the freshwater ponds that are so important to the wildlife migration in the area. So as I said, I think that the attention that the book offers to the ecosystem, and tied with that, as I pointed out earlier, the architecture, but also the infrastructure.
Oh, yes,
Yes, and,
definitely.
and let's talk about, all that a little bit, and Jeff's interest in, water, sewer, bridges, utilities.
Yeah, honestly, with the railroad, that chapter is so dense. I can't even pretend to try to recreate it. You have to read it. It's so dense that I never knew how many companies went, how much they fought each other, how they went out of business, how they were competing interests, how they created parallel lines. It was, they had different interests of what should go where and who should get what. And that impacted the development so much. But honestly, you have to read that because I cannot possibly try to relay it in this conversation. It's too complex. It's the same with the bridge, the Queensboro Bridge. Amazing chapter. Amazing chapter. What's good is that we could get things done then, no matter how complicated it was. It was never easy. It's never easy to get those kind of major infrastructure projects done. People think it should happen quick now. It's not. It's always this torturous process, and there's so many political factors involved, and so many people with different interests that I mean, it's really amazing when it happens. But again, the Queensboro Bridge is also a very good. The Long Island Railroad and the Queensboro Bridge chapters are both very dense, very well written, so you can understand it. But the amount of haggling that went on is extreme.
Yes, so politicized. And today, of course, if you had added on the environmental reviews that are necessary,
Yeah,
whereas at that time, that process had not yet, come as part of the kind of political debates that take place.
right, right.
Let's get back, if we could, to Corona Park, excuse me, and for just a moment, and the World's Fairgrounds. Just today, if the state announced that there would be a casino placed in Flushing Meadows, Corona Park, and I'm wondering what would Jeff say about that? I don't think it's going to be in the park, in fairness. I think it is going to be adjacent to the park, but I can't say that I had time to pull out the plan and see. But we're definitely getting, and it'll be the Hard Rock Cafe casino group that will be doing this.
Well, I can't really speak for Jeff, but I think he would. I think it will impact the park and not necessarily in the best way. So in terms of protecting the park, I liked it better when I heard Mondami was going to fund the parks and that maybe Flushing Meadow would get some money and we could restore the Unisphere. That's what I thought was exciting.
Yes, I know. And I'm so glad that that's on the book cover, because I think it's greatly underappreciated. And I can't tell you how many students that I have, forced to give their attention to Flushing Meadow Corona Park and what exists from the World's Fair landscapes, both 39 and 64. And
So go ahead, go ahead.
Please
I
go
was
ahead.
just going to say just a little bit about the cover. People, maybe you don't realize when you're an author, you don't necessarily get to pick your cover. The press picks your cover. The press designs the cover, but you get input. So, and I thought this was interesting because, I mock things up. They probably don't usually get that. They said you could mock up things. You could show them covers that you like. You could tell them colors. And so I thought it was a fascinating process as a designer. This part was interesting to me. And I had said don't use green because Sunnyside Gardens was green. So I wanted the book to be a different color than the last book. And I wanted maps, and it wasn't this map, but I wanted some kind of a map, historic and new. And they put the new, like an aerial view on the back of the book. So it has the old and the new. And I wanted something iconic. I didn't pick the Unisphere. I'm really glad they did. And they picked a beautiful image. So, I mean, it was kind of a collaborative thing, and they did a great job. I agree. I think the cover is very bold.
Yes, yes. And then if you could tell us a little bit more about, what you see as Jeff kind of, you indicated how his dissertation had been the kind of heart and soul of his initial intention. Is that fair to say that the book was that the dissertation functioned as the original kind of egg or bait foundation for the book?
Definitely.
Okay, and then building out from that, though, what things did, as far as he have to kind of revisit or look into, reconsider in that intervening times? Like, you showed us the startling statistics or about changes in the population of Queens from 1950, for example, moving forward. So what are some of the things that he thought, the changes that had taken place that he needed to pay particular attention to?
Any of the demographic data that went past 1991, he clearly had to update. And that was actually a little bit challenging too, because I had to figure out the sources for those. And Ken Cobb at the records division at New York City helped me with that, actually, because we found it, but that wasn't included in the original manuscript. Any data like that definitely had to be updated. I'm sure he went back and looked through what he had written, because I'm sure he edited it, but the biggest part was extending it past to the present and going back.
And going back,
yeah,
right.
Because it really ended. I mean, it sort of mentioned the 64 World's Fair, but it really ended with the World's Fair, the 39 World's Fair, the extensive research. So anything past that was done recently.
Yes.
Yeah.
And of course, not only the explosion of the population in terms of, as you showed, migrants and immigrants, but also the changing nature of the neighborhoods themselves. And I know, for example, that working with the Queen's Memory Project, my students in their oral history classes have been interviewing some of the librarians from the Queensborough Public Library. And they had fascinating stories about some of the kind of wholesale shifts that have taken place in some of the branch libraries. That the library system has to be nimble enough to respond to the changing needs of the neighborhoods, in terms of having librarians who can speak the language and purchasing the materials, for example. So certainly the diversity of Queens increased rapidly and markedly. Anything else that you recall that, did it become like the landscape more suburbanized with the kind of, fascinated me when I moved to New York City, only then did I notice how many suburban landscapes, shopping, retail in particular, are woven into the boroughs now. There's that IKEA store that everybody knows in Manhattan. You can kind of take the little boat to. But here in Queens, we have lots of those. And is that something that was different? Just that whole kind of putting suburban landscapes in Queens and, like big box retailers, for example, like Home Depot.
Well, I think in terms of the changing ethnic landscape, that definitely had to be addressed because it had changed since the 90s. I mean, it's been accelerated for sure. And I mean, when I was taking the photographs, I wanted to take a photo. I took some of the photographs because then you can avoid the copyrights and all the payments and all that
Yes,
stuff. So of course you go out and take the photographs yourself. And I took the 7 train from. I don't think I'd ever gotten off the 7 train from Jackson Heights to the Billie Jean King Center where I used to take tennis lessons. I'd never gotten off in the middle, but I had to get one of Elmhurst, and I got off and I was like, this is a whole nother world. I mean, I
yes,
loved it, but I just had never stopped there. And I'm sure Jeffrey was constantly discovering places like that that had been one way and had shifted dramatically. I mean, he, he was very supportive of it because when new people came in, they cared about the neighborhood. You
yes,
almost need it. I mean, in the Queens, I think it's unusual that there's so much focus on these neighborhoods. And even when the new people come in, they're passionate about their neighborhoods. I mean, can't even believe you live in New York City. I mean, I know all my neighbors here. It's really cute. But I think that that's something that immigration helps. It helps keep our borough alive because that's the kind of vibrancy and care that you want in your neighborhoods. So those little pockets, he applauded. He applauded. But in terms of the big box, I mean, no. I mean, we weren't even supposed to shop there. I couldn't go to Costco. No,
No, I did.
not even IKEA. Forget
Yeah,
it.
no. I'm always fascinated by the lineup of people waiting to get a parking spot, so that they can shop. It's something that, as I said, I hadn't experienced that until I moved to New York. In terms of the time, I'm afraid I've lost track here of when we were supposed to come to a conclusion, but I see that it's 7:28, and maybe I'll hear the voice of Peter Christian.
I think we're right on schedule. I think
Okay,
Peter was
very good.
supposed to chime in now. Yeah, we're right on
Okay,
schedule. Half
great.
hour,
Great.
half hour. Yeah.
Oh, very good. Okay. Okay. So let's see. That I mean, that last sort of question or sort of issue is perhaps, to your reflections on, did this book open your eyes to a particular area of in need of attention as part of Queen's history? In other words, I have these students that I'm always advising and encouraging. And is there, something about Queens that you said, like, there's nothing or very little on X or Y?
Um, I think what I came away with from doing this is that the history of housing in Queens is very underrated. I came away with it, I mean, unbelievably. So it just seems to me I mean, I actually studied at Columbia under Richard Plunz, who I took his
Oh,
housing studio.
yeah.
We did Sunnyside Gardens, we did Courtyard Housing in College Point. That was my first trip to Queens, actually. And of course, he does extensive work, and he was always interested in Queens. Nobody else was. He put studios in Queens. I mean, he knew that Queens was very important for the history of housing, but I think it's kind of lost outside of that. I mean, I uniquely experienced it through him, I think. I sent him the Sunnyside book, told him you started all this.
Oh, that's so nice. His work is highly respected. I think that, the world of his work. So that's great.
But I would say that. And there probably is more work in the Jamaica Bay in that eco landscape area that should be done. That wasn't a focus of Jeff's research, but I do think it's missing the whole waterfront. What happens along the waterfront in Queens?
Well, thank you so much. I so enjoyed this, Laura. This was a delight, and I hope our audience did too. Thank you very much. And I'm so honored to be invited to participate in this. I'm grateful. Thank you.
Thank you for
Kristen,
doing it. Yeah.
Kristen, it was lovely to have you, and I could listen to you all talk for another few hours, but we have some questions from the audience, and we promised them that we're going to answer them. So I'm going to remind everyone again, this is your moment. Please chime in. Don't be shy. Use the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. Laura, the first question comes from Mary, who asks if Jeff had any contact with Eric Sanderson, who folks in the audience may know is the author of the Mannahatta book, which is now being expanded and I think will be published next year as the Wallachia book, which expands the project he's been doing up at the Bronx Zoo, basically digitally recreating the natural landscape of New York City as it would have been seen by Henry Hudson in the 1600s. Laura, that's a mouthful for a question that might just be answered with no. But did they work together at all? Did Sanderson's work inform Jeff at all?
I don't know directly, but Jeff was very involved with the city seminar up at Columbia University. And if he was at all involved with that or intersected or presented there, they definitely intersected. I mean, he was very on top of what was going on in current research through the city seminar up at Columbia.
Yeah. Well, we've got a couple of questions about who might have been working with Jeff. Another one just came in from John Sato, who asked, did Jeff have contact with Robert Stern, who recently passed away and also wrote a lot on these subjects?
Oh, of course, he highly respected him. He wrote the book on the garden suburbs. He wrote all the New York City books. He knew him through preservation as well. He was Bob Stern was a very big supporter of the Historic Districts Council, where Jeff was on the board, where I'm on the board now, but Jeff was on the board. Jeff worked with them for 36 years, the Historic Districts Council, in numerous capacities. And Bob Stern was a big supporter of Historic Districts Council. I mean, they didn't always agree. But no one always agreed with Bob Stern. He's a challenging guy. But yeah, they definitely intersected. There's no question. And the historians who wrote with Bob Stern as well. Yeah.
Next question. Did Jeff contemplate who was in Queens before the Dutch and English arrived? How much do we get in the book about the history of the Amerindians?
There is a mention in the introduction that says where you can get more research on that. He didn't feel that was his area of expertise, that's an entirely separate historical study. So we left it that there's some research that you could do. This just gives you a framework, and that's how it was left.
Yeah, I believe that's the reference to Robert Grumet's work on the.
Yes, exactly.
Robert Grumet, for anyone who isn't familiar, is the reigning authority, I think, on indigenous New York. Next question. Did Jeff include the evolution of Queens's Chinese immigrant population, such as Flushing?
The issue of immigration is included in the book with very different ethnicities highlighted. There's not a specific chapter on the Chinese in Flushing, but there isn't a specific chapter on any group of immigrants in the book.
No. But I do think that there are lots of references in the chapters that deal with that later period.
Yes.
Yeah. So I don't know if you want to say any more about that, but those chapters are included in the book. The next question was Jeffrey. We got a couple of questions that are inevitably always about Queens, the contemporary landscape. So expect the question about the casinos to come up next. Was Jeffrey concerned about the tearing down of the formerly more English style building and the McMansioning of these structures in Jamaica Estates near Forest Hills?
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. I mean, as an architect, it pains me sometimes to drive around Queens and see the McMansions. I mean, I call it Queens crap, but it's painful. It's not that hard to design a nice house, and and it's always at the expense of very nice looking, more contextual houses and neighborhoods. So
Yeah.
I think I mean, it's tragic. I mean,
Yeah. I mean, especially around there because Forest Hills is, I mean, just the Tudors and it's
stunning. It's stunning.
such a stunning area of the city. Just again, and like another, fully echo your point about the amazing housing history in Queens and how it's totally underrated. And Forest Hills, where I lived as a child, is a stunning example of that. Noam Schuldenrein asks, did Jeff do any research on different forms of culture in Queens other than housing and sport? Um, if so, which ones and what kind of research did he do on those forms of culture? I believe he's kind of talking about culture, but also kind of like leisure and such, right? I mean, and there's some great chapters in there about the horse racing and the planes. Do you want to say anything about that?
Well, there's a whole chapter about how people like to come out and play in Queens.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's very detailed, and why Queens was, because they could anything went in Queens. It's just like why the noxious industries came. There was no regulation, so you're in this tight urban environment where everything's controlled, and then you come to Queens, and you can drink beer in a park. It was like that it was you could let loose. There's that whole culture that had to be tamed and controlled because it wasn't regulated out in Queens. But I mean, that was part of the fun of coming to Queens in those years because
Yeah.
you got one day off, you know, you wanted to play. So there's definitely the culture of, and there's whole families that wanted to come and picnic. I mean, it's not just that, there's the whole idea of where could a family go to enjoy some time off on their, when they had time together as a family and they wanted to get out of the city. So there's that whole piece. There's the elite, when they created their mansions on the East River. There's that whole
Yeah.
group. So but
Yeah.
there's a lot of factories and housing in Queens. That's a lot.
Yes.
That's a lot what
Yeah.
it is.
Well, that stuff about the first, as it the first Gold Coast is just great. I mean, I know it's a short little period, and I'm blanking again on the name.
Ravenswood, yeah.
Yeah, Ravenswood. I didn't know, and just to go back a sec, the whole section about the what was it, the Great Hempstead Plains, right, or the Hempstead
Mhm.
Plains, right?
Mhm.
This vast stretch of grassland that was used for grazing in the colonial period, and was the impetus for creating horse racing out in Queens, and sort of gave birth to the what we know today with the Belmore tracks and all that. Really fascinating. I'm trying to remember what exactly the sort of quotes and statistics, but it was like something about the uh, landscape that was sort of totally unique east of the Great Plains in the Midwest, right?
Mhm.
I don't know if you can help me out with what I'm trying to sort of recall here from the chapter, but really, really fascinating stuff there, and that intersects directly with the birth of leisure culture in Queens. Uh, another viewer writes, you briefly mentioned Parkway Village for UN personnel in Queens Gardens Hills. I grew up there. Everyone knew the reason for it was that local homeowners would not sell to UN people. That's more of a comment than a question. But another question from,
Well, wait, but I mean, it's true that's why they were all housed there because Queens wouldn't accept this interracial group of people that was coming in that had to work at the UN, and Moses originally wanted the UN in Flushing Meadow Park, so it was supposed to be like this convenient thing. But I actually had a woman when I spoke at the Queens Historical who grew up there, and she said it was a lovely community because
yeah,
they were all together,
yeah.
as opposed to being dispersed throughout Queens, which might have been better for Queens, but for these people, they really enjoyed it because it had this whole sense of community and they were all in it together, working together. So I
I
think
went
in
to,
the end, it did probably help integrate Queens a little bit in a small way because she felt fondly about Queens.
yeah, I went to school with kids that had parents at the UN. I had neighbors that yeah, parents at the UN. It was a really interesting experience. Um, uh, Another question: did Jeff do any research or write any books about any other boroughs, or was Queens his only focus? You've referenced the Sunnyside book, but do you want to mention some of the other work?
He had a period where he was in the College of Staten Island Library. He was a historian by training. He went back to get his library degree and became a librarian and still did history, but he became a librarian at John Jay College, where you're a professor actually, which is good. But before that, he was at the College of Staten Island, and he got interested in Staten Island politics. I mean, that's the only other borough I mean, he loved Brooklyn. That's where he was from, but he didn't
Yep.
research it. You know, he knew about it, but he did do writings about Staten Island, which is another totally understudied borough.
For sure. For
Totally understudied, probably because it's, politically so different than the rest of the city, so no one's as interested in it. But he was Senator John Markey. He was very interested in his direction. I mean, I met him. He's lovely. He was lovely.
Yeah.
And so he wrote about him. He wrote about issues in Staten Island. He did some preservation work in Staten Island. So I would say as the other borough in terms of his writing, that was it. In terms of preservation, it was Manhattan, and it was Brooklyn and Manhattan and Queens. I mean, he was very active in preservation in Manhattan for sure.
Well, speaking of his library work, we have another question from a truly great historian of New York City, Mason Williams, who writes, "Thank you for this terrific event and for this essential book. I'm curious, Jeff did a lot of important work on the NYPD. His oral histories and John Jay's library are just hugely valuable. I'd be curious to know more about that aspect of his scholarship and how it might have intersected with his work as an historian of Queens."
Yeah, well, he did oral histories of John Markey. Actually, it's funny. That's a good segue question. It started in Staten Island. He did them in Staten Island. He was very good at these oral histories because he knew the history of New York. It was a perfect fit. He knew the history of New York. And if you put him with a politician, first, the politician would probably be totally amazed this guy knew so much about the history of New York because he knew what this guy was trying to push against or work with or deal with. And so I think it was a good match. So he did them at the College of Staten Island as well. And then when he got his position at um, John Jay, Jeremy Travis, one of the reasons he was hired was to do this oral history project at John Jay. He was in charge of it for several years. I still have the tapes here. I have to give them back to John Jay. I'm going to do that in January. But they have everything digitized. I have the original tapes here. But and he loved it. I loved it. I mean, he'd come home talking about these like famous people that he interviewed, and it was a great dinner conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he again he knew the history. So, I mean, Jeremy made a good choice, in my opinion, not just because of it, because he's was my husband, but because he was very good at that
Yeah.
position.
Yeah.
He's very good at getting, and he was very easy to talk to. Like he could probably get stuff out of people that most people couldn't get because
Yeah.
he's very like low key, and he would just be chatting and all of a sudden he'd be getting more information out of them. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Daniel Grinnell writes, can you talk more about the ways that urbanization changed Queens politically? Here in Astoria, there are clear divides, even within a neighborhood, between the more suburban districts around Ditmars and the more dense central region.
Is the implication in this that the density directs the political direction?
Yeah. Yeah. The sort of suburban urban divide that we find within Queens, right? I mean, I think that there's I can't immediately sort of recall what Jeff talks about in the book, but I mean, he clearly makes reference to this divide, like right from this in the introduction. I mean, um, I don't know if you want to add uh, these are, I mean, I think this it's kind of there's a certain level of sort of self-evidence with this, right? I'll reference our colleagues over at the Center for Urban Research at the CUNY Graduate School under the proud leadership of John Mollenkoff that does really cutting edge research on creates all those maps that you probably see all over the place or have seen recently all over the place with the recent election. Breaking down the voting, and we see clear divides in the more suburban parts of the city versus the more urban areas. I don't know if you want to add anything on that, Laura, but
Well, I mean, it seems to me that's just a fact. It's been studied and there are maps that show it.
yeah,
I will say though, I mean, Queens has a suburban component.
yeah,
It,
for sure.
there's nothing wrong with that. I don't feel like there's something wrong with it. People have different options of how to live in the city. I think it's unique. I know some people think it's wrong that you could have a single family house in New York City, but I mean, that's a choice and it's being made by all different ethnic groups and all different
Yeah.
income levels. It's a choice of how you want to live. It's not necessarily a choice that you're making because you have a political position.
Daniel's just written in to say his question is more about change over time, and again I'll uh, turn to you if you want to take that up. The book details radical transformations that Queens goes through. I mean, as you said in the talk, I mean, one of the things that's most interesting about the borough is that it's an agrarian borough for so long, but and comes late to urbanization as such, but experiences really radical changes in a relatively short period of time. So it is true that it sort of has this synecdoche with the larger kind of story of urban development, but what's interesting is how quickly that happens and in all sort of all of its phases. And
Well,
um,
one could say it's still happening because
for sure,
so, well, so Queens is certainly being eyed as the next big land grab.
I mean, yes,
I know that.
yes. Who was John Jacob Astor, buy up Manhattan. They're not making any more of it. Um, Question from Sandra Ospina. Where does the name Queens come from? This was a nice part of the book that Jeff put to rest. Do you want to take that?
Well, Jeff contended it wasn't from Queen Catherine of Braganza, and he fought that when that statue was being created, he and a large number of people, it wasn't just him, protested it because they could show that that wasn't where it came from.
Yeah.
And it was very controversial, but he fought passionately, and he inserted that in the book. That's something he added, Kristen. That was added. It's kind of random in there. It's a
It's
little
kind of
jarring
great
when you
though.
get to it. It's so Jeffrey.
It's just all of a sudden you bop from like the 1600s to the 2000s to the late 1900s and you're like, what? But it's a great little anecdote.
I debated editing that, but I didn't touch any of the content. Nothing. That's
It's
the only
great.
part. That's the only part I thought this is a little out there, but you know.
It's great. I liked it. I thought it worked.
It's good to flash you back past and present, you know?
hmm 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 Um, well, we're getting a lot of comments, mostly about some of the comments that you've made about how we sort of appreciate Queens's history more, and more on this question of the divides that we find within the borough. These are, sort of not questions as such, I think, that we're sort of going to answer in any sort of way beyond opinion. But I think that your talk has demonstrated, as one of our listeners suggests, that Queens might need its own architecture program. There definitely needs to be more attention to the history of housing in Queens and its architectural wealth. Um, question, question.
I think the part of the dilemma is that people from Manhattan view Queens one way and people from Long Island view Queens another way. And
Hmm.
Queens, no one can see Queens for Queens.
Yes,
They're coming from their direction and
sure.
saying it should be this, and it's not. It's Queens, and it's weird, and it's messy, and It's not. It's not Brooklyn. It's Queens, and I think that that's part of what happens. And so if you're putting Manhattan onto Queens, oh my gosh, and if you're putting Long Island onto Queens, and it's true, kind of bits of them are together, and they don't totally mesh, but nothing totally meshes in Queens.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
just that's the beauty of it. There's no real hierarchy. It's lovely.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's what I like about it too. It reminds me of Lowell, Mass. I think I told you that, I figured when I first came to Queens that perhaps, I don't know, 2,000 Lowells at a truncated subway and two airports, and that's, it's Queens.
Um, maybe this will be the last question to the history of industry in the city, which is a really fascinating part of the book. Makes total sense. Part of that sort of spatial turn that historians are familiar with on a local scale. But Claudia writes, I grew up in Wayside in the 50s, 60s, 70s, wondering, does Queens still have any industry? There used to be a lot of factories in the neighborhood. Does any of that exist? And um, I, I did know the answer to this question, but I don't anymore. In terms of which borough has the most manufacturing, and in terms of the scale of manufacturing in the city, I mean, it's very small these days. It's very small. The deindustrialization of New York happens, it's happening in the 30s earlier, textile factories going down south. And they're just major, major exoduses in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. I mean, uh, capital did what it does always. It went to cheaper sources of labor. So um, there's just little of that left. I mean, there's subsidy programs and such in the city, but um, I don't know if you want to talk about manufacturing in Queens.
Steinways are still here, no?
Yes, for sure.
Steinways are still here, and I mean that's the biggest one that comes to my mind, actually.
Yeah. Um, we have a few minutes left, but I think this has been a lovely conversation. And I want to say, Laura, it was so good to have you. I'm so glad that you were able to shepherd this book to completion. It really is a fantastic addition to, a very huge library that is New York City history, but one that really um, desperately needed a book like this. I hope that it spurs historians to do more research on the history of Queens. Um, but I'm very glad to have it on our shelf and to feature you here and to put a spotlight on Jeff. So, and I want to say thank you to Kristen as well for your fantastic questions, and for just being such a delight. And I hope that everybody shares this video. We will have it up on our YouTube channel in a couple of days, hopefully. And I want to thank you all for joining us. And I want to wish you all good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. Good night.